Poison Pen. We're going to have them read, which we, as I said, we don't do that terribly often. But I'll have Willy kind of open up and talk about the new book and maybe sing a song or two, and then we'll turn it over to Todd, and then mainly you'll be relieved. I'll stay out of the way. I might pitch a few questions towards the end, but please help me give J. Todd Scott and Willy Vlautin a really warm welcome.
Well, thanks. I know most of you are probably here for Todd, and I'm psyched to hear him read, so I'm going to do my thing pretty fast. Speed read. This book is set in Central Nevada and in Tucson, Arizona. I said it in Tucson mostly because I love the music out of Tucson, and I've always wanted to live in Tucson, and I'm anchored knee-deep in Portland, Oregon. And I can't. So the only way I can live anywhere else is daydreaming. It's a story about how easy it is to break a kid, and it seems everybody gets scarred up and dented up growing up. But if you dent a kid up too much, by the time he's adult, it's really hard to get those dents out, and people spend so much effort trying to undent themselves as they've grown up, if they've grown up hard. And I was very interested in that idea with this book. I did a couple things with it. One was I made it in Central Nevada, which is one of my favorite places ever, and Tucson, which is another place I love. So I picked places that I really wanted to live in, and then I brought in an old ranching couple that hire a guy working for him since he was 14. And the kid is really dented, and the old couple just love him, and they want to give him everything they have. They want to give the ranch to him, and he just cannot quite accept it. He leaves for Tucson because he wants to be a professional boxer, so I'll just read. I don't think I need to set it up much more than that. By sunrise, they were on the road. Mr. Reese drove, and Horace chewed Copenhagen and worked his hand exerciser, and the bay gelding Lex and the old mare Honey swayed back and forth in the stock trailer. Well, I know it's early to talk, but I was hoping we might, Mr. Reese said. He held a cup of coffee in his left hand and steered with his right. Well, what is it? Said Horace. Well, I'll need you to be honest with me. I'll be honest, even if it hurts my feelings. Well, I'll try, Mr. Reese. Horace spit into an old McDonald's cup, and the truck shook as the road worsened. The old man slowed to 25, finished his coffee, and set the mug between them on the bench seat. If I'm optimistic about my back, I have maybe 4 years left where I can work. As you know, after I heard it the first time, we hired Albert and his wife to help out. You were still in school. He and his wife had talked about buying the ranch someday, but then his wife left him, and that idea fell apart. The reason I'm bringing this up is sooner or later I'm going to have to sell the place. We'll have to move into town or in with one of our daughters. I know we've talked about this before, but I wanted to again before you left. You seem a natural for this sort of work, and you're good at it. I know you're young and you don't have a woman or a family, and it's a lonely life. That's only something you know if you can take. What I'm saying is, after your boxing career, why don't you come back? We'll set out a plan for you to take over the ranch, for you to own the ranch yourself. I'd hate to see all the hard work we put in these years disappear like it has with the Casey place and the Haas place. We've seen both of those go from working ranches to nothing. Now Morton's is sold too, and who really knows what will happen to it? Working a ranch is hard, especially if you're single. You know all that. And there's no money in it. And I know you've been skittish with us, and it's hard for you to accept gifts. I also know it's hard for you to relax around us, to trust us. But we trust you. What I'm saying is, Mrs. Reese and I think of you as our son, and we want you to have the ranch when you're ready for it. Horace looked at the old man, but couldn't speak. Tears welled in his eyes. He looked out the window at the hills of sage and the distant mountains behind them. They drove for miles before he said anything. Well, I don't think anyone's ever thought I could run a ranch, he said finally. But that you and Mrs. Reese think I could, well, that's the nicest thing I've ever heard. I won't forget you said it. I really won't. You and Mrs. Reese saved me. I know that. Well, you saved us too, Mr. Reese said. And you helped Mrs. Reese. She wasn't herself after our daughters left. You know how she was, how she gets. You helped her. Horace again looked over at him. Well, there's been a lot of years I dreamed I was your son. A lot of years. But Mr. Reese, I'm going to become a world champion boxer someday. And I don't know how long that's going to take. And to do that, I have to move to the city. I have to change the way I live and where I live. I wish I could do both at the same time, but I've thought a lot about it. And there's no way I can. But boxing's such a hard way of life, Horace. It's not going to be that bad. But fights are hard to get. You're the one who told me that the other way of fighting is more popular now. Well, MMA is more popular. But people still like boxing. They really do. So I'm not too worried, he said. But his voice grew uncertain. I'll get the fights, Mr. Reese, and I'll be okay. You'll see. It just takes work. You're the one who told me that. You're the one who said if you just keep working hard, things tend to break your way. That's true. I have said that. Mr. Reese's voice trailed off. He rubbed his face with his free hand and cleared his throat. Can I ask you another question? Sure. Why do you have to change who you are? Why do you have to become a Mexican boxer? Well, I should have never told you that, said Horace. Mr. Reese looked over at him. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you told me. It's good to be honest. And I'm honored you'd share that with me. But I just have to ask why. Because Mexican boxers are the toughest, said Horace. Everyone knows that. They go toe-to-toe. They're true warriors who never quit, who never back down, who are never scared. Eric Morales, he's never been afraid of anything. Not anybody. Oh, I bet he has. He never has. I know he hasn't. But you're not Mexican, Mr. Reese said. Horace didn't answer. He rolled down the passenger side window as the sun began to come over the Monitor Range. He let his arm hang out, and the morning air was cool and smelled of sage and dust. Did I upset you, Horace? No, he said, but it wasn't true. He wanted to jump out of the truck. He wanted to be a million miles away from that old truck. The thing is, Mr. Reese, there's no tough Indian boxers. But that's where you're wrong, the old man said, suddenly excited. He slumped down in the truck seat and steered with his legs and took the wallet from his back pocket and pulled out a piece of paper with Mrs. Reese's handwriting on it. In bold letters at the top of one side it said Indian, and on the other side it said Irish. Well, Mrs. Reese and I went to the library and looked on their computer. We found out some things. There was a boxer in the 70s named Danny Little Red Lopez. He was part Ute and part Mexican and part Irish. Now you're part Irish. Your grandfather, Doreen's husband, was from over there somewhere. And you're part Paiute. That's different, sure. And he has some Mexican in him, but not as much as you'd think. And then there's Marvin Camel. He was a Flathead, and it says here he was a champion. Now Flatheads are out of Montana. He isn't from Nevada, but he's close. Not that far away when you really think about it. And last is a guy named Joe the Boss Hip. It said he was the first Native American heavyweight world champion. But I don't want to be like Marvin Camel and Joe Hip. I know who they are. Horace fell silent for a moment and then looked at the old man. Mr. Reese, I don't want to be an Indian. No good fighters are Paiutes. That's not true, the old man said. And you know it's not. That's just your grandmother talking. It's a bad thing to say. Anyway, like I said, you're part Irish too, and there's a lot of great Irish boxers. I have a list of those on the other side. Don't bother, Mr. Reese, Horace said and shook his head. No one thinks I'm white because I don't look white. I don't look Irish, so I'm not Irish. But I look like a Mexican. Everyone who doesn't know me thinks I look Mexican. They really do. He again looked out the window and his feet tapped down on the floor of the truck faster and faster. He began to pick at his fingernails. His voice faltered. I appreciate all you're saying, Mr. Reese, but I'm going to become a champion. I am. It's like the boat book said. To be a champion, you have to create your own future. You have to make it yourself. You have to build your boat little by little and brick by brick until it's unbreakable and unbeatable. And that boat, it'll take you to the next level, to the level of champions. And that's what I'm going to do. But what if that doesn't happen? What if you don't become a champion? What will you do then? A winner doesn't think like that, Mr. Reese. And for the first time in Horace's life, he was mad at the old man. His voice shook. Don't you get it? A winner only thinks about winning. A champion, he only thinks about being a champion. The old man slowed the truck to a crawl and again looked at the boy. Well, I didn't mean to upset you, Horace. I'm sorry, I am. I just feel I have to ask these questions because you're my friend and that's what friends do. They watch out for each other. What if you get hurt in some permanent way? I won't get hurt, Horace said. Anyway, I can't worry about things I can't control. A champion doesn't think that way. A champion only thinks about the things he can't control, and he does the work on those so he can get to the next level. And when he gets to the next level, he just thinks of the level after that. He just keeps building his boat. Mr. Reese again rubbed his face and tried to think. He cleared his throat. I hate to bring this up, he said, and I hope you'll forgive me someday for what I'm about to say. But I feel I have to. I have to because boxing's so dangerous. Remember, Horace, I took you to your fights in Las Vegas. I've seen you box. I've seen what happens when you get pressured or cornered. I see how you panic. Don't bring up Las Vegas, Horace shouted, and tears fell suddenly from his eyes. His feet tapped harder against the floor, and he fidgeted uncontrollably. A mile passed in silence, and then his voice became nothing but a broken whisper. Please don't bring up Las Vegas. Please don't ever bring it up again. I'm begging you. I'm seriously begging you, Mr. Reese. It was just one fight, and I told you I never wanted to talk about it again, and you promised me you wouldn't. You promised me you'd never mention it, not ever. I did promise, that's true, the old man said. And I'm sorry I broke that promise. This conversation hasn't gone the way I was hoping it would go. I didn't mean to upset you so much. I'm not the most eloquent, but I mean well. I just want to help you, and I'm running out of time. And I believe I have an answer to some of your problems and some of mine, too. Horace wiped the tears from his eyes. I know what you're talking about, Mr. Reese. I do. I appreciate it. And don't worry, when I come back, I'll buy the ranch for a lot of money. One of my main goals is to make sure you and Mrs. Reese can live the easy life. You deserve that. And I'll make sure it happens. I'll take care of you both and the ranch and all the horses and dogs. Everybody, I really will. You've been the best parents I've ever had. I know all that. And I know my own mom and dad don't care. So it's my solemn promise that I'll help you. And I don't break promises, Mr. Reese. I'd rather die than break one. But for right now, I'd rather if we just quit talking. The old man nodded. You're right, he said. I've talked enough, and I'll stop. I just hope someday you'll forgive me.
Let's see, do you want to...
Can I just ask one question?
Sure.
When you set the book in Tonopah, Nevada, were you aware that there's a Tonopah here?
Yeah, I used to wear a shirt because I've toured all over, and we stopped. I used to camp outside of Tonopah, Nevada, since I was a little kid, and then so when we passed Tonopah, Arizona, we had to pull over and see it, and then I forget the shirt. There's the little there's like a truck stop there.
Right.
And I used to wear those. We used to wear all those the shirts. All the guys in my band wore that same shirt for years. Something Alice Joe's.
Yeah,
oh, I forget.
Alan Joe's or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just threw me at first when I started reading the book, and I thought, sheep in Tonopah. Wait a minute.
Well, then you see all those road signs that say that, the thing.
The thing.
See the thing.
Yes.
It keeps coming up on you. Well, let's switch over to Todd for a minute, and why don't you tell us a little, how many people in the audience have not read The Far Empty, Todd's first book? So you don't really need to say it too much. Well, there was a, as you all know, there was a wonderful character in that book, Stanford Ross. Yeah, who we talked last time was he was inspired by the judge from Blood Meridian.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, and anyway, I'm not giving anything away then to say that he meets his end at the end of The Far Empty. And can you kind of set up where you're going with this book?
Yeah, and actually, I have to say that was a prerequisite for my mother, that the judge get it, my Stanford Ross get it in the first book. If he didn't, she wasn't going to read any more of my stuff. She has a very black and white sense of justice. High White Sun picks up a couple of years, really, a year and a half or so after the events of The Far Empty. And that first book was about a corrupt sheriff and his missing wife and their 17-year-old son. And one of the primary characters in that book was a young deputy named Chris Cherry, who had reluctantly returned home. He'd been a football star, football hero, kind of like Trevor here, and got injured and ended up returning home and became a sheriff's deputy with very little interest in law enforcement and no knowledge of it, and was faced with this domineering, legendary lawman in Stanford Ross. Many horrible events happen. Stanford Ross expires, and really by default, Chris becomes the sheriff, which is where we open up in High White Sun. And I've been asked this question before about Chris, because unlike many protagonists or heroes in books, he's not a superhero. He's not really a very good cop. He doesn't know what he's doing, and he struggles with the responsibility of carrying a badge and a gun. And that's, so I see him as heroic, but not a superhero. And I want the reader to watch a young man struggle to get good at his job. And unfortunately, Chris learns pretty early that he's going to be constantly under fire as he gets better at his job. He has a town who reveres the man he replaced. They don't feel that Chris is up to the task. He's hired a young Mexican female who he got to know in the first book as a deputy. That had never been done there before. That's America Reynosa, who carries over from the first book.
Great character.
Yeah, he has brought in an older gentleman to kind of serve as his chief deputy, to kind of help teach him how to be a cop. And he faces in High White Sun an immediate problem of a murder of a river guide there in Terlingua, and also the arrival of a group of white supremacists. Really, it's kind of a mixture of motorcycle gang and Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. And
Pentecostal preacher in there too.
yeah, and a preacher in there as well. And Chris and America and his very small department, they have 6 deputies for a very large area, find themselves under siege. And Chris has to learn under fire, and has to face how you protect the ones you love and not become as violent or as hard as the man that he replaced.
It's a tall order, right?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that Chris necessarily succeeds by the end of this book, but I found that to be much more, for me as a storyteller, much more interesting story to pursue than someone who had all the answers and knew everything, and but with a coat hanger and a cell phone and some baling wire could solve every problem.
That's kind of the classic sort of Western trope, of the hero going in, cleaning up the corrupt town.
Yes.
And then that sort of thing.
Yes, and obviously I'm a huge fan of Westerns. That was what The Far Empty was about. It hit every Western trope, some would say a few too many. And High White Sun continues that tradition,
And we were talking a little bit in the back about, you mentioned these, kind of the rise, they've never gone away, but the rise of these white supremacist groups kind of, what can I say? I mean, the climate today seems to be drawing them out of the swamp that they came from, and in some ways kind of giving them a okay,
Yeah,
Very common.
and yeah, well, and I had the idea of writing about one of these, gangs or white power groups for a while. I had done a lot of research on it. It's something that always had interested me, and throughout my career, I had dealt with some of these individuals. I also dealt with outlaw motorcycle gangs as well. So I had a lot of that kind of in my hands, and had wanted to do a story about someone undercover in that situation, which actually, honestly, is not a very unique story at all. But as I was, plotting it out and thinking about it and turning it around in my head, I realized I actually had half the story written already, because I had great characters with Chris and America, and I had a great location in my fictional Murphy, Texas. So it was, why not mix, the kind of Aryan Brotherhood, white power story that I had with characters that I had grown to love and thought would be a perfect foil for that.
Yeah, I mean, as you all know, America was such a delight in the first book, and it's great to see her really come into her own in this book.
Yeah, and America has a strength that, actually, many of the female characters have a strength that Chris doesn't. I have 3 daughters, so I want them to have, female characters that have agency and drive the narrative and aren't damsels in distress. None of my female characters are that. and Chris's girlfriend Mel, who was somewhat divisive in the first book. Some people hated her, some people loved her, but she's important to him. And America, who I've always seen as kind of the center of gravity for all of these books, really comes into her own in book 2, and she has a much harder edged view of what it means to be a cop and to carry a gun than even Chris does, and so they make an interesting pairing.
I suspect your your female coworkers are no shrinking violets either, right?
No, I mean, I've been in law enforcement 23 years, and one of my first training agents was a female, and one of the best undercover agents I've ever met was a female. So, yeah, some very tough women.
Well, do you want to give us a taste of the book?
Yeah, I will be happy to do that. And I'll have to be honest, I don't like reading my stuff. Like, after I write a book and it's published, I won't touch it. It's like a live snake to me. I don't know why. I mean, I had this dream when I wrote books that I would go and I would hold it all the time and look through it again and reread it, but I really don't. So I don't feel very comfortable doing it. But the little bit that I will read is with Chris, our young sheriff, and his girlfriend, Mel. And Chris was gravely wounded in the first book. And he has since, in book 2, gone out and bought the very land that he was shot on and built a house out there, much to the consternation and amazement of the people in Murphy, Texas. He kind of bought his own grave and now lives on it with Mel, and it's way out. My fictional Murphy's already far out, and Chris lives even further. So this is a scene early in the book where Melissa, it's from her viewpoint, is thinking about this. Chris had fallen asleep, the sheets kicked off, his long, thin body pale and exposed. He'd never really gained back all his weight after the shooting, after the recovery. And if you just looked at him nowadays, standing against his truck or out on the porch like he was earlier, with his scars hidden beneath his clothes, you'd never guess all that had happened to him. You would have had to have known him before to really see how much it had cost him, how much of himself he'd left behind and lost, both good and bad. Mel slid next to him above the sheets, the way he was. She'd put up 2 box fans in the bedroom, and even with them turning full blast, the room was still too hot. Chris had on boxers, but she was naked, trying to stay cool, wanting to lie closer to him, yet feeling the heat coming off his body. He moved in his sleep, said something to himself, as moonlight touched his face. It was hard sometimes for her to imagine how he'd almost died out here, somewhere just outside, maybe within sight of these very bedroom windows. She'd never admit to him how she was afraid to look out them when she was here alone, afraid she might see the ghost of who Chris once had been walking over the creosote caliche, lost and unable to find his way back home. She knew he took some sort of strange comfort from being out here, as if he could reach out to that younger version of himself, maybe have a talk, and remind himself of who he'd once been, even though that person was truly dead and gone. Everything that had happened at the Far Six in Murphy had changed him irrevocably. It had killed some parts and strengthened and darkened others, all made worse now by the constant stress he was putting himself under to run the department well and protect those who worked for him. To be nothing like the men who had tried to kill him, Sheriff Stanford Ross and Dwayne Dupree. But she'd lost something too when he'd been attacked. A sense of security, an untroubled future. She needed him, and it was a need that was as strong as ever, since any Chris was better than no Chris at all. But she'd always be afraid living out here, sharing space with the ghost of the man she'd first fallen in love with, the only man she could ever love. It was a sort of fear that wouldn't go away with alarms and security lights, even though they had plenty of both installed in the house. Maybe it was the sort of fear that would never go away at all.
Everybody, well, how many people don't know? Can you tell us a little bit about this is the obligatory question about your day job? Because both of you guys have really, writing's not your day job, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Tell us a little bit about what you do and what you have done.
Well, I've been a federal agent for 23 years. I've been with DEA. I went to law school, was going to be a lawyer, and decided that carrying a badge and gun was a lot more cool than that. I didn't have any musical talent, so my
I don't either.
So I couldn't join a band, so I joined DEA, and I don't know, moved 8 or 9 times. I've been all over the world. Spent half my career pretty much on the border, at least 10 years of it, both in Arizona. This is my second tour through Arizona and Texas, and I'm not on the street anymore. I got a bunch of other young, tall guys that do that. I'm a supervisory agent here. I oversee a bunch of groups, try to keep those guys safe. Writing was a passion of mine, and decided to try it seriously a few years ago, and now I'm lucky enough to torture you people with these books.
How do you get the time? Like, because you work such a heavy job.
Well, according to my boss, I'm really not a very good agent. I'm fortunate that I have a family that's pretty flexible with me and my time, and it's interesting. I've talked to a lot of authors, and we all do it differently.
Yeah.
And I have to treat it just like another job. So I get up early, and I hit a word count every day, and I write pretty much 365 days a year. And I know other guys say that's crazy, and they would never write that way. But I have a very rigid schedule, very rigid life. Some would say too rigid. So.
Well, Willie, I was going to ask you, there's a lot of things I'd like to ask. A couple of years ago, I had a great honor of putting together this anthology called The Highway Kind, and the theme was, it was kind of this nebulous theme about cars and the road and, existential aspects. I don't want to flog this thing, but...
No,
Flog away.
But a number of years ago, George Pelicanos, who's a really wonderful crime writer, if you've never heard of him, check him out. One of the writers for The Wire, you might know that TV show. He was here for a book signing, and he goes, "You got to check out this guy, Willy Vlautin. I think he may be a genius." And I'd never heard of you at that point. And I think Northline, your first book, had come out by then. So I grabbed it and have devoured all the books. And it's really wonderful to see, your stuff really taken off and getting the readership that it deserves. And then I got in touch with Willie, and I said, "Hey, would you be willing to write a story?" He said, "Yeah, sure." And boy, not to flog this book, but I don't have the experience of tearing up much when I read fiction, but the end of this book, each time I read it, wow, just a devastating story. But tell us a little bit about which came first for you. It seems like the writing and the music kind of flow out of you equally. Do you see it as one big kind of buffet?
I started writing songs as like a 12. My brother was my brother was a folk singer, and my brother he was a young womanizer, and so he would go out with a girl named Mary, and then he would spend all week writing a song for Mary, and then he went out with a Mari, and he wrote another song for Mari. And he'd write all these songs for girls, and then take them back to his waterbed. And he had a mural of a forest on one wall and a really great stereo, 70s style. And so he's the guy that gave me a guitar, and he said, "You're such a sad sack little guy. Why don't you write songs about it?" And I did anything that he told me to do. And because he wrote songs about, all he wrote songs was to get girls in his waterbed, I made a promise to myself at 13 I would never write a song about with love, which has been the worst mistake I've had in my life, but I kind of held it true. So I was always writing folk story songs from a young age. And then 18, 19, I just started writing stories. No one would have ever thought I was intelligent enough to write a novel, but I just I've written story songs for years up till then, and then one day I just sat down writing a story, and I never quit.
Were the Woody Guthries and Dylans and some of those classic guys?
Yeah, I loved Dylan. Guthrie I didn't know until later. Springsteen, a lot of country, like Merle Haggard, Willie Nelson. I loved all those guys. And then with writing, I just kept it. By the time I was 16, 17, I was in bar bands, and being in a failed band is you have to get a thick skin, and I didn't want to do that to writing. So between 18 and I started to 35, I didn't even show anybody. I'd probably written 5 novels by then, 4 or 5, and I didn't show anybody because I was too scared. People would say, you're no good at it. What are you doing? And then I wouldn't have the thing that I really enjoyed doing. So yeah, at 35 I got a little more confidence.
Well, it's interesting because on a number of your books now that you've written mostly instrumental soundtracks to the novels. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, like this one, there's a download code in the back of it, and you can download a full instrumental record. We just kind of retired, but I was in a country rock band named Willy Vlautin for 23 years, and when I'd gotten this novel in working shape, this novel felt like music to me. Some novels I never think about music in terms of it, but this one, it felt like music. So over the course of 3 years of writing it, I wrote maybe 25, 30 instrumental songs. And then when I got it in kind of working shape, I gave it to each of the guys in the band, and then brought them in the songs, and then those guys dress them up. I write little songs that are like bums, and then the guys sober them up and shave them and give them a new set of clothes. And so, yeah, one other book, the one you mentioned, Northline, felt like the same kind of sadness or melancholy. So I put
a lot of steel guitar.
And I have a problem with liking pedal steel. It's a sickness that I like to steel from when I was a kid, and now I'm just any steel player I meet, I'm just nice to them, and hoping that they'll play with me.
Well, it's funny because music would really lend itself. You should come up with a soundtrack for yours too. Get a little ranchera, Tex-Mex kind of Flaco Jimenez kind of action going there.
No, I love that music, and most of these, I don't write to music with lyrics that really messes with me. When I write a first draft, I always write to, my kids call it whale music. That kind of droning, ambient stuff, but it blocks out other sounds. But when I'm into the second and third or fourth, fifth revisions of a book, I'll put playlists together and I'll play the same song over, as my family knows well because they get beaten into their skulls. I'll play the same songs over and over again for certain scenes because I'm looking for a certain sound or a certain rhythm when I'm writing sentences, and the music helps me do that. So The Far Empty had a lot of Whiskey Myers. I listened to a lot of Whiskey Myers when I was writing that. Brandy Carlisle as well. High White Sun had, and the book after it, This Side of Night, had a lot of Chris Stapleton on it. But I tend to listen widely and wildly, and whatever song kind of hits the theme that I'm looking for, that goes on that playlist, and then I'll listen to it ad nauseum until the book is finished.
It's funny, I picture like a Ry Cooder soundtrack, sort of a Paris, Texas style vibe to it.
Nick Cave.
God, he does these soundtracks with Warren Ellis.
Yes, exactly.
And they're like, my wife, she goes, man, could you please not listen to that every day? That's funny, yeah.
Well, Don't Skip Out on Me happened to be a song title from the last Richmond Fontaine album, and I was wondering if you might be willing to give us a taste of that. You
Sure.
brought your guitar.
Sure. Yeah, all my novels kind of start as songs. Like the song will be like the initial idea of the themes I'm working on. So this is a song I wrote when I was messing around, driving around in Nevada, and although the lyrics don't line up with the novel, I feel like the novel's kind of dipped inside the sadness of the song. So. Don't skip out without shaking me. Don't skip out. Oh, don't skip out on me. Well, I know you think I'm just a liability, but I can carry my own weight. Just don't skip out on me. The bus from Tonopah, well, it can take my money too. I got an aunt in California. She's always promised me a room. Just don't run out on me while I'm sleeping. My guts ain't right and my health's been failing. It was your fault as much as mine. We both know that's true. We traveled some hard miles. Oh, that's gotta mean something too. I can't keep my eyes open. It's getting harder and harder. Don't skip out without taking me. Don't skip out. Oh, don't skip out on me.
Thank you so much. Well, I was going to mention one thing. You both have exciting movie/TV things going on, and one of Willy's earlier books, Lean on Pete, is just about to come out as a major motion picture. And we have up at the front of the store, there's the film company gave us a box of you can put your name in to win some free tickets. So before you leave, you might want to do that if you're interested in seeing it. Steve Buscemi and who else is in the film?
Chloe Sevigny?
Terrific actress.
Yes. And a kid named Charlie Plummer is the main guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Awesome. And Todd, last time you were sworn to secrecy about what was going on in your world. Can you say anything else?
No, not really. But it's exciting. You have all these conversations and you see things, and I think the thing that I think is neat is that someone, has really responded to what I'm doing, and is envisioning it beyond the page, and I think that's really neat. So.
Can you say TV or feature?
It would be, I think, along the lines of a TV series
Okay.
that would follow each book.
Terrific.
So you're going to continue beyond the third book?
Well, I have a fourth book coming out that's not part of this series, but yes,
But you'll continue the series after that.
as long as people want to keep reading them, I'll keep writing.
And you've already finished the third, right?
Yeah, the third one, This Side of Night, is
Great.
all done and put to bed, so it's out of my hands, and it's based on what Putnam is telling me. It should be out around this time next year.
Fantastic. And Willie, what are you working on? I mean, Richmond Fontaine is kind of on the sidelines now, right?
Yeah, well, I just been touring a lot. I have another book. I don't write as fast, but the kind of book, but it's different. With the kind of books I write, people don't want them that fast. You want them like every couple of years. But yeah, I just tour and making music, writing. Yeah, I like writing. So it's the only thing I ever really liked. So when I'm not touring, that's what I do.
Willie has a great voice. His other band called the D-Lines. If you get a chance, check out this album called Colfax. And he has a lead singer, female named Amy
Boom.
Who, man, what a voice. And
Yeah, she's a remarkable voice.
yeah, no, it's a beautiful album called Colfax.
When are you going to be playing here?
I don't know. She got injured. She got hit by a car, so we're waiting until she heals up to start touring again. But we finished a new record, but we're just waiting for her to heal up. But we'll start touring
Good.
in the winter here,
Yeah.
because we in the Northwest is like it's the opposite. In the Northwest, you want to get out in the winter, and here I guess you want to escape in the summer.
Now, Richmond Fontaine played Phoenix.
Yeah, we used
It's
to
been a
play
while,
Tucson. We recorded a record in Tucson. I've always been a big fan. You know, Calexico. You like Calexico?
Yes, yeah, very much.
Maybe they should do your soundtrack.
Yeah.
I love Calexico.
I don't know. I was going to ask you to write an instrumental for a song for one of my books. 'Cause
Sure.
You were phenomenal. I mean, people always look at writers and say, "Hey, what you do is really hard," or "How do you do it?" And people are always fascinated, that we write books. And to me, it's really not that hard. You just kind of sit and do it and hope it works out. But I've always been fascinated by someone who can write a song and then more importantly sing it. So you're really good. They said you're a genius. I'll buy that. I mean, no one's ever told me that. But
Well, that's the weird thing about songs. It's like you see one running down the street and you have to go chase it, and you don't know if you'll ever see another one again. And we're writing. The thing I like about writing it is the work ethic. You just have to sit down, and it just takes so long. It's like moving an iceberg. It just takes forever.
yeah.
We're writing a song it's just a mystery. It's like you find $100 on the ground once in a while, and you keep looking in that same spot for years, and just picking up things trash. You write so many bad songs, and then once in a while you get a good one. I don't understand it at all.
Willie's, I'll open up the questions here for both of you guys, but Willie's, the protagonist of your new book, as he said, half Paiute Indian, half Irish kid, feels very alienated. And one thing I wanted on the soundtrack was one token death metal song.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he does.
Because that's what he listens to in the
He's a
book.
big Death Slayer and things like
Yeah,
that.
the problem was my band doesn't like I brought in a couple of those, and they're like, how about we just do cowpunk instead? Fast pedal steel. So yeah, I got outvoted on that.
But the character, Horace Hopper, he morphs into Hector Hidalgo. And I remember emailing back and forth with Willie. We both really loved Los Lobos, and you said that David Hidalgo was kind of the name anyway.
I love Los Lobos, and I've always been I've always followed boxing, and I've always, like Eric Morales, the Tijuana boxer. I always admired him so much. So I kind of based Horace's love of boxing through. That's his name.
Not Carvajal,
No.
our local guy.
Yeah,
Well, let's
you're right.
open it up to questions. I'm sure you have for Todd or Willie. That's what I was afraid. Yeah. That's what I was afraid.
I got one. In a small town setting like your book is set, when someone comes in and takes over as sheriff or marshal or whatever, in real life, don't they have professional training that they can get, that they get sent to?
Well, yeah, you get what's called post-training,
Yeah.
a lot of times, and that's actually talked about, I think, in one of the books. So, Chris has been trained. He's legally allowed to carry a gun, but you have to understand that his mentors, and really, you learn being a cop not by the book and not by the class and not by the academy. You learn it on the street with senior cops, senior agents, the mentors who teach you how to do it. That's how I learned it. Because I came on the job, I'd never held a gun before in my life by the time I became an agent. And Chris's mentors are universally bad. They're actually good cops. Dwayne Dupree in the first book is actually a much better cop, right? Like knowing the law and knowing what to do and not being nervous or anxious about it than Chris ever is. But they don't really teach him the right way to do the job. And so in the second book and in the third one, that's what he struggles with. He knows what the books say, and actually it's something of an issue in book 2, because he brings in a former Midland police detective who'd worked homicide.
The older guy.
Yeah, Ben Harper.
Yeah.
And Ben, and so Chris has all these books, right? He keeps looking through these books, kind of how to run a department, how to manage stuff, and Ben makes fun of him and says, that's not how you do it. The world isn't like your books, Chris. And there's that old riff about cops being sheepdogs or the military being sheepdogs, kind of protecting the sheep.
Right.
Well, Ben Harper says at one point to Chris, we face monsters, we face wolves, sometimes we have to be wolves too. And that's the sort of policing and law enforcement that Chris really does not want to do.
I got a question.
Yeah.
What turned the tables for you to make you start writing stories? What writers were the ones that you're like, man, I got to do this?
Well, I said I wanted to be a writer in high school and college, and I had a lot of really bad short stories and novels that I wrote, and then thought I would do something more practical, which was, become an agent and put away the writing. But I've always been a fan of like Cormac McCarthy, for instance,
Sure.
and he was a huge touchstone for the first book and kind of the series. James Elroy was another writer. These kind of long, complex, spin-out tales, which my books have been accused of being. But I've read so much. You sit on surveillance. What you do, if you're not paying attention to what's going on, you read. And the other thing that I've learned is that cops are great storytellers, because you do have a lot of time sitting in a car. Most of us aren't carrying a guitar, so I guess that's why we're not writing songs.
We get fired.
Right. Yeah, I get fired. But you're sitting in a car hours and hours and hours, and what do? You tell stories. And actually, you kind of tell the same stories over and over again and tend to embellish them a little bit. They always get cooler as time goes on. But there's this great, it's kind of odd to say, but there's great oral tradition with cops. That's how you learn the job. And everybody's got their war stories, literally and figuratively. And so, although I had all these great writers that were touchstones that I looked up to and whose books I devoured, it was 2 decades of sitting in cars, sitting in shitty alleyways, sitting in hotel rooms, bullshitting.
Sounds like being in a band, right?
Yeah.
Joseph Wamba's career. He told cop stories.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question that might apply to some other people in the audience who are in law enforcement, which is the great question. How do you, after you have seen so much horrible stuff, and your eyes are open to the ugliness of the world, is it a challenge to compartmentalize and then go home and, give the kids dinner and...
that's a, you hear that, and I've seen that. It's not an easy, being a cop or being an agent, and they're different things, right? Being a street cop versus being an agent. There's some crossover, but they are two, different types of law enforcement, each with their own challenges. It's hard on families, it's hard on marriages, it's hard on kids. Long hours, you're gone a lot, and you deal with, bad people doing bad things. and you know it can be tough. And I think actually what happens though with a lot of guys in the job is they devote so much of themselves to it. And in a lot of instances, they have families who devote themselves to it too. So it's not just that one guy going to work today. His whole family kind of goes with them, right? Because they have to buy into it too. That when they retire, which some of us are getting, can do or getting close to being able to do, is they don't have anything afterwards, and that's where they really struggle because they've given everything to the badge and to the job, and one of the things I talk to my guys about all the time is having balance, finding something in your life outside of what we do, because this job is a jealous mistress. It'll take 24/7 if you give it, and and we want it, right? I mean, we're trying to do good work, but got to have balance. You got to have something outside of the job, outside of the badge, and for me, it was writing. This was something that was just mine. It hadn't, didn't have to deal with the job this was just me. And these stories are just me, and I write them just because they interest me. And Chris Cherry, in the book, has the same way. He has a love of books. That's his thing outside of his job.
Right. So how do you hold a relationship together when you're on the road half the year?
Well, I don't tour. 3 weeks is the most you can do. But yeah, you can. It is a struggle, man.
Yeah,
I mean, you come home and sometimes they're like, "Oh, you're back," you're like, we have horses, and so there'll just be like a list of things to fix, and then the dog will give you a dirty look. Everybody gives you a dirty look, and then you have to kind of fight your way back in. Sometimes you come back and it's like a movie. It's really nice, and then sometimes it's a struggle. But my wife, she has been with me the whole time I've toured, so she kind of, I think she likes it a little bit when I'm gone. She doesn't have to listen to my Nick Cave and Morricone records. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a struggle. Everyone struggles with that one that's in a band. It's a tough, or any person that travels a lot. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
How do you keep horses in Portland?
Yeah, well, we live like an hour outside.
Oh.
You just, like any big city, you just drive until you can afford horses.
So
we're
Flush you out to the outskirts.
Yeah, we're about an hour outside and like way up a weird road, and in the woods. And the horses are miserable. 4 months a year because it rains so much, and then it's beautiful in Oregon in the summer. I'd recommend Oregon from June to October. It's the most beautiful place in the world.
Somebody have a question over here?
Yeah, I was interested in, you said that you always had an interest in the Aryan Brotherhood and the white supremacy type.
Yeah, I don't know that that's a great thing to have an interest in.
I think it's interesting because I think maybe you were interested in their lifestyle as a cop to bust them, or because they're usually mostly prison groups, or the Aryan Brotherhood.
Yeah, no, I had an interest in the dynamic of these sorts of organizations and how they attract young people. And that's it's just something that it kind of fascinated me. I encountered it throughout my career. People who lose their way and why they lost their way in this particular fashion. And you get a lot of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas is part of this is the criminal organization. But one of the ABT members in the book, his son Jesse, has gone more into the white power movement. Hammerskins and stuff like that, and because he was the ABT guy, John Wesley Earl was in jail for so long, and he was preaching this stuff because it was convenient because he was in jail and that's how he survived in jail. But his son actually adopted the ideology
On the outside.
On the outside, and his was less about the criminal side of being in a prison gang, but more about the white power movement. And one of the quotes in the book from one of the characters is, everyone thinks these groups are about hate, and that's not really where it starts for a lot of people. It actually starts with love, because kids are drawn to them because they have shitty home lives, or they don't have parents around, or, they're fractured in some way. And these organizations, these groups prey on that. They give them a sense of belonging. They give them a place to go to. They give them a family that they don't have. And the hate part of it comes almost later. It's the belonging is where it starts.
That's right. Yeah, okay.
Anybody else?
I'm sure we have ask a question.
Well,
I guess I have a question.
Yeah.
Two-part. Are you fluent in Spanish?
Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not. And I'm embarrassed to say that I, put a lot of Spanish in my books, and I use Google Translate to get it there. And then there's some very nice Spanish speakers at Putnam who actually make it make sense. And I'm also embarrassed to say that there's a young woman in this book named Vianney, and it's actually a name I stole from a girl that I worked with back in Texas. And I actually, with my Kentucky accent, thought it was Vianney. And I called her that for months and months and months. And she didn't correct me. And I finally heard someone say, hey, DNA, what's going on? And I'm like, holy shit, I had your name wrong. And she's like, yeah, you've actually been saying it wrong for months now. And I said, well, why didn't you correct me? And she said, well, it just seemed so nice, and I didn't want to hurt your feelings. So I stole her name and appropriated it for this book as a way to kind of make it up to her, since I've been butchering her name for months. But no, my Spanish is not all that great. I understand it pretty well after 9 years of taking it and being on the border, but I don't speak it.
Okay. Just some of the quotes in there, they're very interesting, and I do the same thing. I have to Google translate them.
Yeah. Well, and the Putnam copy editor, one of them is a woman named Anna, and she is Hispanic. And so she takes it very personally to get this Spanish right. And some of the idiosyncratic phrases and stuff like that, she helps me work through it.
Okay.
So what's going on in the heroin world?
Well, it's bad. It's, for those of you who don't know, Arizona is one of the biggest smuggling corridors in the United States. And a good chunk of the East Coast heroin that you're seeing back there, it originates here, or comes through here, I should say. So,
The Chamber of Commerce doesn't exactly tout that.
No, they don't. I used to say that, we didn't have some of the overdose problems here in Arizona that we saw back east, but that's in fact not true anymore. We have a huge problem with it, and I'm very fortunate that I have a group of folks, in DEA back here in Phoenix who are looking at that specifically. We as federal agents, we can seize 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds of heroin out of whack, and we are, unfortunately, out here on the roads. But we've also started to take a look at these street level dealers and these overdoses that are plaguing these communities. And we have a program that's been talked about around here on the news, where we go out and someone overdoses, we treat it as a criminal case and as a homicide. And for federal agents to start working at the street and work up, something we don't often do, but we felt we had to. And so I've got a lot of great investigators and intel folks who are taking these overdoses, and these are young folks too, they're 19, 20, 21, really tragic stories. And with the assistance of family and friends, finding out who they were sourced by, who got them the dope, and then we go after that person, and then we figure out who they got the dope from, and we keep working, stair-stepping up the ladder. But the person who gave them the fatal overdose, that person's getting charged with a homicide.
I know Oxy was the big thing for a long time. I'm sure it still is, but fentanyl was a big game changer, right? With the current state of affairs.
Yeah, and that's what really started killing people, because you had a heroin with fentanyl mixed in, and it was difficult for a heroin user to know exactly what they were dosing themselves with, and they were dying. And we seize, it's unfortunate to say, but we'll seize pounds and pounds of raw fentanyl, again, coming through here and heading east to be distributed.
The next book in this series is what's going to come out next year, and then your standalone after that?
After that, yes.
Can you say anything about the standalone, what the theme is?
Yeah, it's another Texas set book, but not down in the Big Bend. It's actually set up in more the Midland area, oil country up there, and it's about a very interesting friendship. It covers 13 days. That's the name of the book, 13 Days. But it actually looks over the lifespan of these two men over 50 years. One of them, took one path, and the other took another, and they've been friends and enemies for 50 years. And one of them, dies at the very beginning, and the other one tries to find out who killed him, and has 13 days to do it for a reason that's in the book. But it bounces back and forth in time between these gentlemen and their families, and it's I don't know. I think I'm pretty happy with it, and we'll see how it turns out. Yeah, more crime and mayhem, just a different version of it. And actually, what's interesting is a lot of the characters in my Big Ben books are younger than me, and I just turned 50. And so I wanted to write a book about someone closer to my age, who had kids and that sort of stuff, and that's what I wanted to do.
And it's with the same publisher?
Yes.
And they took a standalone?
I gave them 2 paragraphs, and they said, "All right, we like that."
Good for you.
Write that.
It ain't easy to come by.
No.
So, what's the source of the fentanyl now? I've read that a lot of it's coming out of China.
Yeah, I mean it's coming from China and then into
Central
Mexico.
America, Mexico.
And
And,
Isn't it a pharmaceutical drug? Fentanyl? Fentanyl? Main drug?
Yeah, it's Genesis. So.
is there still a lot of OxyContin coming out of the drug manufacturers in this country?
Huge. There was a great article in the New Yorker about that a couple months ago.
McKesson?
People are making billions of dollars off this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where our current heroin problem started. The most recent version of it. I mean, anyone who's done dope work as long as I had, there's every few years there's a new horror, and this is heroin's second or third go around, but it's fueled by the pain pill problem.
So how about going after Big Pharma?
Yeah, we have people who do that. That's just not me.
No, they ain't doing a very good job.
No.
Well, on that cheery note, I've asked Willie to kind of take us out with a pretty intense song that he wrote.
Well, Jesus, mind you, this is not like I was trying. I always try to. I've written a lot of songs, so I have one Phoenix song, but it's a rough song. But since we are in the crime mystery bookshop.
I'm just going to get the Phoenix direct from you.
Yeah, it's not a Glenn Campbell cover, right?
No, I wish. Believe me, I've tried to rip that song off for years.
Willie turned me on to an album by Wanda Jackson that was recorded in 1969 at Mr. Lucky's. Do you all know that? The old club on Grand Avenue, and it's still there. It's interesting. The old sign is still there in the club, and with the Crescent Ballroom and the Van Buren and all the music scene, it'd be neat to see that brought back. All the greats played there. I'll shut up now. Thank you.
I used to get. I was a big track rat. I loved betting on horses for years, and I'd bet. I went through a Turf Paradise phase until I couldn't figure out Turf Paradise. But I used to fly down just to go to Turf Paradise, so this is a song that has Turf Paradise in it. See what you guys think. I fell into painting houses in Phoenix. Oh, I'd been there a week, picked up illegal on the street. Oh, the kid was 19 years old. Said he had a wife and a kid in Monterrey, Mexico. Oh, the suburbs of that town are a sprawl. Man, we both never knew where we were at all. We work 5 days straight, then we didn't pick him up. Oh, and I knew that the kid had never been paid. Probably just waited at the meeting spot all day. And we just drove to a different part of town. Picked up another kid for a job in the subway. Well, I didn't show up the next day. You know I ain't shit, but I ain't that way. Got a job as a janitor in Turf Paradise, and I moved in with this girl who worked on the backside. And at night I'd always read the news, the metro section of the Scottsdale Tribune, about a family left in the trunk of a car, about a family led and abandoned in the desert alone. To watch a horse break down, or your girlfriend who can't stand the sight of her own face, or to watch your brother drink his life away. Oh man, just get me out of here, get me out of here. Oh, get me out of here.
Not sure we're going to be invited to any birthday parties, you and I together.
Well, thanks everybody for a special evening tonight, and I'd like to congratulate Todd on the release of his brand new book, High White Sun, and continued success, Willy. And everybody check out his work if you're not familiar with it. You're in for a real treat.